All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Matt Carey. I'm a reporter with Vixio Gambling Compliance, a regulatory intelligence provider to the gaming industry. I'd like to welcome everyone to session 2 of Ideas Power Lunch Summit webinar series, presented in partnership with GeoComply. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about sports betting 2.0, the next evolution of what has been a rapidly changing sports betting industry in the US, as I'm sure everyone on this panel can attest, and talk about what the next wave of legislation and regulation may look like here in the US. Before we move on to introducing our panel, a couple of quick housekeeping items. First off, if you have questions for our panelists today, please send them using the chat function here on Zoom. We'll definitely try to leave some time at the end of the session to address all of those. Also, secondly, for those of you who are watching this and you think, God, this panel is going so well, everyone on it's really smart, moderators especially good, I like to watch it again and tell all of my friends and coworkers to watch it. The webinar will be available as an on-demand resource on IDEA's website at ideagrowth.org after the series concludes, I believe tomorrow. So joining me today is a great panel. We have Dave Reebok, former director of the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, Representative Dave Meridian of the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and Corey Fox, Vice President of Government Affairs for FanDuel. This is a great group. It really covers so many different sides of the gaming industry and the legislative side, the regulator side, the operator side. So I'm really excited to have this group. And I want to dive right in. I guess, the first thing I want to start with is probably the most topical issue we've seen in the last week or so, the introduction of the Safe Bet Act in Congress by Representative Paul Tonko and Senator Richard Blumenthal. So the first question I want to throw out to the whole panel here is, I guess, first, before we dive into the bill itself, do you think there are areas where federal legislation would be helpful or welcome in the industry at this point? And if so, where do you think those are? I guess we'll start with the legislator in the panel, which is Representative Meridian.
All right. Thank you, Matt, and thank you for, I'm sure, everyone tuning in. It's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. That said, I'm a big proponent of kind of overall having less government overreach, and so I do think when you do a federal model and things like this, it kind of limits the states to understand their demographic, to understand their constituency, and to understand what could possibly work. I'm coming from Massachusetts, and we looked at many other models before we decided on what we were going to be able to move forward with. What we passed in Massachusetts isn't what Pennsylvania had, isn't what New York or anywhere else would roll with. And so from there, it gives us the opportunity to kind of cater it how we want to. So I do initially have concerns about it. Obviously, we have to make sure that there are safeguards in place. And if, the federal government sees that legislatures individually are not acting in the safety of the general public, then obviously there needs to be someone to step in. But I think ultimately leaving it to the individual states to decide is probably the best bet.
Director Reebok, I want to turn to you next on that same vein.
Well, when I look at the federal government, my first reaction is you're already involved. And I'll give you some examples of how they're involved, and maybe we can talk about their performance in these areas. But they're already involved. And for example, the Indian Gaming Act. The Indian Gaming Act is a federal law. The federal law, we've seen regulations from the Indian Gaming Commission there in the federal government, certainly dealing with internet gaming, sports wagering, and the authorization for over 500 Indian tribes to engage in gambling on tribal lands. So if we look into the future, what's the performance of that with regards to some of the items that have been addressed by the Tonka and Blumenthal bill with regards to weaknesses in the states? I haven't seen any regulations on that from and directing what should be done with the 500 tribal casinos in the United States. That's not saying that they're not doing a good job. I'm just saying the federal government can, if they so choose, begin to be more actively engaged, certainly in that area of legal gaming in the United States. The second area, every state in the nation was approached to have election wagering. We all denied it. The federal government was asleep at the switch. You have now election wagering that came into play under the commodities trading. And now the federal government finds themselves, oh my God, we got to stop this. Now what are we going to do when we're in court? When you look at illegal gaming, states have reached out to the Justice Department. Certainly the Department of State has a role here in combating illegal gaming sites. It's no secret, easily accessible. Go online anytime you want, find out who they are, where they're operating at, and why can't we stop them? We don't have a really good record on this right now. There are some actions that have been taken in the past, some good ones. But anybody that looks at this and considers it being a very successful performance, I think has to take a step back to say, we need to do more in this area. Federal government collects tax on sports wagering. Where's that money going? Is it going to fight illegal gambling? Is it going to responsible gaming issues? Is it going to public health initiatives to support people who are addicted to gambling? I don't know. So it goes into a deep hole, and we're talking about tens and tens of millions of dollars that are contributed by the operators. Another performance area. So when I look at the feds, you do have a role. You need to improve your performance. Okay. And we need your help. And the states acknowledge that. And they've many ways reached out to the feds to work cooperatively and collaboratively in dealing with some of these major issues.
Corey, I'll turn to you next on sort of where do you land on this?
Yeah, sure. So, the patchwork of different regulatory regimes across different jurisdictions for online gaming in the United States certainly presents some challenges for the operators. And we work hard to design our systems to be able to meet those challenges and also design our whole operating model to work with each of the state governments where they've authorized online gaming. And I think the reality is that that is working, and that there are opportunities for each of them to experiment and come up with different regulations, and for everyone to view what's going on in other jurisdictions and sort of see what's right for their state. So I think we're comfortable with that model. I think, as Director Rebuck said, or former Director Rebuck said, I think there is an opportunity for the federal government to take a look at the excise taxes that they're currently collecting. They could also look at the Wire Act to see if that makes sense in a world where over 30 jurisdictions have legalized sports wagering, and to think about those issues. On the more consumer protection front, I think the states have taken a leading role in that, and that's appropriate because that's how gaming has been regulated in the United States.
So, and the follow-up I'd ask on this is, we've all seen the bill, and I think, the popular opinion is this particular bill likely isn't going anywhere this year. But looking at some of the specific reforms that are in the bill, some of them would be obviously a pretty radical shift in terms of what's proposed. I mean, the most notables, what is pretty much a ban on most sports betting advertising during the day, a ban on in-play wagering. I mean, there's other provisions in there. How do you guys think that some of these reforms, like in a world where this bill were to pass or something similar to it that include these reforms, how would this impact the industry? Director Rebuck, I'm going to come to you first on that one, obviously, given your experience.
Well, again, they're very far-reaching. And I think, again, when you see the comments by the sponsors, when they say things that state regulation is faint-hearted than half-baked, and we don't want to ban gambling, but we want to take back control. That sends a message to the states, a very adversarial message, that what we have done and where we're going and where our weaknesses are and what our challenges are and what efforts we're taking. I think most states are doing a very aggressive job in trying to be better with the industry. We're not faint-hearted and we're not half-baked. And there's many, many examples of what states have done and where they have done to, and what they have done to enhance the oversight regulation protections that should be in place for a brand new industry, sports wagering, essentially 6 years old. So I think it's on their part, it's a knee-jerk reaction. Certainly their staffers may not be as informed of the details of what is working and what is trying to be done, not only by the industry, by the states. You know, the timing of this is very interesting to me, why this comes out now, because it really adds no value to what has been identified and is online constantly by people looking at things like responsible gaming and the efforts to enhance and do a better job with advertising. And when you're dealing with these issues, you're dealing with not just the gaming industry, you're dealing with social media, you're dealing with how to regulate the internet, you are dealing with companies that profit as advertisers, and you're dealing with the broadcast industry, you're dealing with the mass media industry, you're dealing with groups that are much more involved in this in a comprehensive way than just, oh, well, the sports wagering industry is just out of control and every advertisement they put out there is violating consumer rights and things like that. They can't do this independently. There's partnerships involved here. And when you look at this, it's a lot more comprehensive and a lot more detailed, and what is essentially in my mind, an action to essentially react to the loss of PASPA. You lost, get over it. Okay. And it's not for you to take control of, because I can't imagine the Justice Department coming to the state of New Jersey and saying, well, your people voted in 2011 by 2-to-1 margin to have sports wagering. They didn't know what they were doing. So we're going to tell the Justice Department to come in and look at what you're doing. And by the way, we're going to take it away from you because we're the big parent and loco parentis. We know better than you do. And all your voters, they really don't know what they want. And they made a mistake. And we're better than you in explaining that to them. Or to come to Nevada and say, after 50 years of sports wagering, you just don't know what you're doing. So you're going to have to apply to us to do it in year 51. It's just, I mean, it's an area that it's mind-boggling to me, in that the arrogance of saying we know more than you do, without working on things together that we have already reached out to them to work on to make things better for our citizens in all the states that have legal sports wagering.
Roy, let me follow up with you on that same question, given, obviously FanDuel, a ban on advertising and a ban on in-play wagering would be, I'd say, quite impactful to FanDuel's business. So, how do you think what impact do you think that would have?
Yeah, obviously, some of those, like when I think about our ability to advertise, that is one of the rights that we get along with being a regulated operator in our country. And so it really would cut down on our ability to acquire users into the regulated and taxed market away from the illegal market. The other perspective I had on it as an operator was, the structure of the bill, as I understand it, sets up a system whereby the states would have to set up certain minimum controls and then go to the Justice Department to get approval to say, do you have these controls in place correctly? Well, there's a lot of nuance to all of those controls, and what's appropriate now might not be appropriate in 6 months or a year or 18 months. And so when we went back to a state regulator to negotiate with them about what the controls, how they might be changed in the future, who are we negotiating with? Are we negotiating with them, or are we negotiating with the Justice Department? And does the Justice Department have the ongoing oversight function that makes any sense? And the ironic part of that for me is I think it creates a real confusion with respect to accountability, which is exactly the reason that PASPA was struck down in the first place, was that the idea was that you couldn't tell the state governments what to do. You either had to enact the policy yourself or not as the federal government, because voters would not know who to hold accountable for those decisions. So from an operator's perspective, it really sets up that same problem and a real sort of thicket of regulators to try and solve things on a go-forward basis.
And Representative Meridian, I know I wanted to turn to you next week on this because I know this was variations of this. I remember were discussed when you guys passed your sports betting legislation. I remember there being conversations about advertising and in-play wagering and collegiate wagering and different sorts. I mean, stronger provisions than we've seen in a lot of states. And obviously most of those didn't make it through. But what was sort of that conversation like, and ultimately, like, what impact do you think those sort of provisions would have had and would have on the market?
Yeah, appreciate it, Matt. To some of the comments that were made earlier, I completely agree. When you hear that it's half baked, that kind of flies in the face of all of us who put so much time into crafting legislation that we thought was meaningful. As the ranking member on the Economic Development Committee and one of the 6 members who was on the conference committee who ultimately negotiated the final bill, we spent a ton of time trying to get legislation that was fair to everyone. With the fellow panelists here, I can't even begin to guess how many times we sat together and had one-off conversations or conversations with Chair Paracella and others, because we wanted to pass legislation that we thought took into account the history of sports wagering and what was good and what wasn't, looking at the New Jersey models and so on and so forth. And, it kind of the comments that were put out there by my federal counterparts, it reminds me of the fact that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And, we should probably listen to the feedback, see what's going well, and not necessarily say that, hey, we know better than you. I think in Massachusetts, it's going quite well. And much like in anything, you could certainly find some faults, but I do think that we, by and large, have put consumer protections in place to make sure that, all of our residents are safe. We did a wonderful breakdown of where the dollars were going to go, and went to some sports wagering addiction services and things of that nature too, as well as going back to our cities and towns. So, to kind of hear the half-baked thing, and I hate to keep going back to it, but it's brutal when we sit through 50, 60, 70 meetings just to craft the House version of the bill. I'm sure my Senate counterparts did the same, and then we had the conference committee, so we did the conversations all over again. So we try to put a ton of attention into this, and I think that we're always open to seeing where the conversation goes in the future. To Corey's point earlier, you don't know if what you potentially put into place now and implement is going to be what's going to be kosher or acceptable a year from now. So to give the different municipalities, to give the states the regulatory authority over that seems to be the most practical.
Corey, I want to come back to you. What are some of, we've talked about the care that the states put into this, but obviously it does lead to a lot of different regulatory approaches in different states. And for a company like yours that's operating in so many different states, what are some of the challenges associated with having different regulatory approaches in different states?
Yeah, sure. So, from a customer perspective, we operate something called the FanDuel Sportsbook. But from a regulatory perspective, there is not a FanDuel Sportsbook. There are 23 online FanDuel Sportsbooks. And so it is a challenge to ensure that we can stitch together an experience for a customer where they can make a deposit in one state and be able to use those funds in another state, where they can go and check on their bets that they made previously, even as they're traveling throughout different jurisdictions and so forth. So that it feels good as a customer, and it's fluid, and we're not forcing them to go through the pain of the back end of it, which is the regulatory piece, which is 23 different sports books. And so when you think about stitching together an account and wallet that adheres to each of the know your customer requirements in each jurisdiction, and if you get verified in one jurisdiction and travel to a different jurisdiction with a more stringent KYC approach, that we make sure that we apply that approach in that new jurisdiction. If you travel and you bring your funds with you to a different jurisdiction, that we're applying the deposit requirements that existed in each jurisdiction appropriately. So there's definitely a lot of work, both from a technological perspective, from an operational perspective, and also from a marketing perspective. I think many of us who are sports fans and listen to podcasts have had that experience of listening to, the 15 different RG resources that are required to be shared alongside any sort of sportsbook marketing. I think there's certainly an opportunity to work on that one, because I don't think it's helping customers particularly figure out how to get resources when they're having to listen to all the different numbers. And I know there's been some progress recently moving towards 1-800-GAMBLER, but those are just a few of the challenges we face. But really the goal is for our customers to have a unified experience to the degree possible, while making sure that we're meeting all the regulatory requirements that are specific to each jurisdiction.
Director, I want to turn to you next on this because, obviously New Jersey being one of the leaders in the expansion of sports betting, what are some of the key lessons you think other states can learn from your experience and regulatory experience in New Jersey in terms of sort of cutting down a lot of that, cross-state friction that operators may be facing and customers may be facing in that respect too?
Well, first and foremost, you have to embrace technology. If you haven't embraced technology as a regulator, and it mandates upon your operators to share all the technology they have available to them and they utilize for their marketing staffs and their operational staffs with their compliance staffs and their RG staffs, then you've made a big mistake. I mean, this fear of AI, whether you call it AI or algorithms or technology, the positive benefits to customers of having that information available in a readily detailed way by technology and used by your compliance officers and used by your RG employees in dealing on the online world is a tremendous tool in having your ability to reduce the risks of the problems that some people are going to experience. And the other thing I would say is not only that they embrace technology, but you got to listen to all stakeholders. You got to clearly communicate the reasons for your decisions to all the stakeholders. And if they object, then they have the ability to challenge you either in court or by going back to the legislature. And then finally, in many of the areas that a regulator deals with, we tell the industry there is not a proprietary interest that you have in your company that has a good RG program or has a good KYC program or has a great AML program or has a great way of dealing with cybersecurity. You will, because we will make you share this information to allow everybody who's operating in your jurisdiction to be at those minimal standards. Now, I know a challenge for most states, and I was a regulator. You have a regulatory process by law you got to go through that is not equipped to be speedy. And in this industry, speed is of the essence when it comes to dealing with some of the areas I just outlined to you as a regulator. So what we did, and we took a chance in New Jersey, and I tell other regulators to do this, we meet collaboratively with the industry on all these issues. And then we implement what we call best practices, not supported by a regulation, but they adopted the best practices, knowing full well that they're going to have them in play and they're all going to be equal. And then we would follow it up with a regulation because we'd have to enforce it somehow, but you can't force a best practice because they could argue it's not in law. However, kudos to the people we dealt with in New Jersey. They put into place the best practices. And many of them had to deal with technology and investment of money, time, and people. And they all did it. So shortcut to get to the regulatory end, but the benefits are huge to the customers and, in my mind, to the industry itself.
Representative Brady, I want to turn to you next because this panel is ostensibly about sort of the next wave of regulation and legislation. I think every year legislators in pretty much every state that has already implemented sports betting is looking at what can we do better, what can we improve, what do we need to change, what's gone well, what hasn't. So I guess what are the key factors driving the discussion in Massachusetts when it comes to potentially revisiting sports betting laws in 2025 and I guess beyond for the near term?
Sure. One of the things that you saw most recently in our budget debate by my friends in the Senate was an amendment that would actually take the percentage rates up to 51%. So when we did all of our back and forth on the tax rates, the House was at, I believe it was 12.5% for the in-person wagers and 15% through the mobile platforms, where obviously, 85-90% of action comes by the electronic leash that's always in your hand. The Senate looked at 20% in-person and 35% for mobile, and then we ended on 15% and 20% respectively. So as you can see, much like with probably many legislatures out there, we're trying to balance the budgets, and unfortunately, sometimes you have to follow the money, and if the money's drying up, I think that's going to be one of the big catalysts for potential legislatures looking at revamping a very successful model. I mean, when we had our original projections, we were talking 60 or 70 million back to Massachusetts. And the most recent numbers that came out in May were saying 128 million in roughly a year since we did full implementation. So we doubled in some instances what we were looking at. It's a wonderful tool to try to help to supplement an economy, but it's obviously not the silver bullet that's going to make everything cured. But yeah, I think that's one of the bigger ones. When you start looking at kind of the regulatory side or some of the consumer protections, you obviously have to look at AI. That's an ever-changing landscape, and most of it is good, but you obviously have to worry about some of it. There are certain things that concern me when it gets to AI, and I don't mean to jump the gun. I'm sure we're going to touch on AI a little bit more in the future in this conversation, but you start looking at job security. AI can kind of take over for everyone, and then all of a sudden now you're actually displacing workers. The loss of kind of just the human contact, instability through AI with, how they might target different sectors of the betting population. So those are all things that we have to take into, take in and try to figure out when we deal with our Mass Gaming Commission, who's done a wonderful job with the regulations, at least in my opinion. And then obviously kind of the ethical side of it all. Do we want to touch it? It's pretty new. It's still in its infancy here. It's proven to be very valuable, but do we want to touch something that quickly? I think back to a couple of years ago prior to my time in the legislature, but when I was working for my predecessor, and I think back to when we passed what was dubbed the tech tax, and the tech industry was like, hey, please don't do it. We're trying to boom and grow in Massachusetts. And unfortunately, the legislature moved forward to try to tax the industry, and the industry had such an upheaval that we had to go and repeal that just months after we did it. So that's why I wonder when some of the amendments are filed for 51% tax rates. Listen, we don't want to drive industry out. We did what I think to be a good job of trying to get industry in the Commonwealth. And so, we want to try to support everyone. So those are some of the things that we have to look at in the future for sure.
Corey, you've seen how fluid the sports betting landscape can be when it comes to, I guess, both the legislative and the regulatory side of the equation. How do you prepare for sort of this next phase or wave of regulatory shifts?
Yeah, I think, it really starts by, enumerating our goals as an operator, which is to build a long-term sustainable business that's around for decades to come. And I think in order for us to do that, we have to think about how do we protect our customers? How do we protect, we all have friends and family who are users of these sites, and how do we feel good about them using it and ensure that they can't get in over their heads from a responsible gaming perspective, or fraudulently have their account stolen, or some of the bad things that can happen in the worst case scenarios on these platforms. So I think when we think about it, it's building a really safe platform for our customers. We do have to pay our fair share of taxes and setting it up for the long term. We also have an advantage at FanDuel where we are owned by a company called Flutter, which operates sports wagering and online gaming brands around the world. And so we've seen a number of different regulatory approaches over a long period of time to online gaming and what those lead to. So we can look at, what is Sportsbet in Australia seen in terms of regulations? What is Paddy Power in Ireland seen? What's going on in the UK? And think about what's right for the US and try to work with the regulators to move in that direction and make sure that we're moving forward with the things that we need to do to protect our customers in front of the regulations, and hope that the regulations come to ensure that the entire industry meets a kind of minimum standard to protect customers.
Before I keep going, I just want to pop in with a reminder here to the viewing audience to please send along some questions. I will definitely try and get to some of those later in the webinar. I want to turn to Director Rebuck here. Thinking about sort of the next wave of regulation and sort of how that process works. Are there examples you can share where New Jersey had to either revisit or update regs to address rules that just weren't effective anymore, whether it was because of the way the industry evolved, or just something that went differently than expected? Is there anything you can share about, of how that process ended up working out?
Oh, absolutely. As most people know, New Jersey's been in the online gaming world oversight regulations since 2013, and embarked on online sports wagering thanks to Corey's group coming in 2018 in August. It's a young industry still, but absolutely, when you look at the standards that were in place for online gambling, and most of the same standards for online sports wagering, because essentially it's really just a different type of game, but you're still using that online platform. What we had in play for KYC, responsible gambling, cybersecurity, geolocation, AML, we're in phase in New Jersey. We're not on point 1 anymore. We're on like 1B, 1C, 2B. If you as a regulator are not actively aggressive and taking advantage of all the tools that are coming your way to improve upon what you put in place on day one, then you're negligent, and you should be really talking to your staff to say, we need to do a better job. Because the power of technology, the power of this industry through the internet, as we all know, the first iPhone came out in 2007, right? We're now, 18 years later. Without a doubt, it is the most addictive device in the world on how people interact with social things, with communication, with commerce, with entertainment. It is ever changing. And if you think it's going to go away, it's not. So absolutely, I can point to numerous examples. And it gets back to what I said with our meetings with the industry. Many of the changes we make are industry driven. Corey's here, and I can tell you when we rolled out our 0.2C RG standards in January of probably 2022, 6 months later, they came back with their own research saying, we think the industry ought to look at this standard and adopt it as a best practice across the board. Because of our research, we looked at their research and said, ooh, you've stumbled on something here that we think would be a valuable trigger in helping the RG community on your own employees to identify risky behavior. And it's implemented. So absolutely. I mean, it's a mandate that has to be followed by everybody. And I can point to so many examples where the industry has involved with us, where they've come to us with ideas privately. They want to do it, but they recognize it might put them at a disadvantage if they don't do it. So they'd rather have the regulator have meetings with the industry to say, this should be imposed by all of you. And in many cases, it is. And evidence-based research can be shared. And my point is that, there's so many examples that I'll just bore people, because any of the regulators as well as the operators have seen the changes themselves over time, and it's been for the better.
Great. I want to turn to you, sort of the same question. Except from an internal standpoint, is there examples where you looked at what you guys were doing and said, we need stricter internal policies for this, for some of the same reasons that we just outlined, Director Rebuck?
For sure. And some of it is us, again, stitching together that multi-jurisdictional product that we offer. So, for instance, it's true that the self-exclusion lists are at the state level, right? So if someone self-excludes in New Jersey, technically speaking, you could offer wagers to them in other jurisdictions. But we, from the beginning, said we're going to offer a multi-state account and wallet where we know who our customers are in each jurisdiction. They don't suddenly lose their difficulty managing their play when they cross state lines. And so we're going to enforce whatever rules they put in place for themselves in the first jurisdiction. I think FanDuel was also one of the first operators to come out and say we're not going to offer risk-free language anymore. Before any of the states had prohibited that type of language. Since then, several of them have. I think including Massachusetts and New Jersey. We also have, come out with some statements about how we would work with respect to advertising at college facilities where we weren't going to get involved with that. And since then, several states have put in place regulations. So, we are committed to building a sustainable business, not just for us, but having a sustainable industry going forward. And sometimes that requires, taking a little bit of a commercial hit to try to lead everyone in the right direction so that we can maintain the social support that we need to continue operating for a long time.
And Corey,
And
Matt, I just want to add to that to
Sure.
say that the regulators get together regularly. And the message that in New Jersey we have to others is we're copycat industry. If you have something that's really working well, I want to know about it because I want to do it. I don't want to be embarrassed. And so I will share with you as the state of New Jersey, everything we're doing. And I will tell you that in the RG world or the advertising world, this is why we did it. And oh, by the way, all the operators are already doing this in New Jersey. But when I go to the operators and say, how come you're not doing that in state A, right? Or state B? And their first response is, we're ready to do it. But we need to be in on the equal plane of competition. And I can understand that. I can understand that. And so we deal with the regulators and say, they're already doing it in New Jersey. Just take this boilerplate, copy it, put it in play. And I tell you, they will not object. And if they do object, your initial response to them should be very simple. You're already doing it in New Jersey. What the hell what do you mean you can't do it here in our state? They can't win. And so it's just a matter of sharing best practices, incorporating them in, and following through. And again, it's the hard work's been done. Let's keep on rolling it out across state jurisdictions. And if other states aren't doing it and they have a law against it, let's say, all right, well, then you got to go back to the legislature and talk to them about, we believe this is the necessary protection to enhance our operations and ability to regulate this industry in a more effective way. Because there are laws out there that prohibit you from doing things that other states can do without law. So it's not just the regulator.
Absolutely. And Representative Brady, I'd love for you to weigh in on this as well.
Sure. And a couple things there. We looked at New Jersey a ton. We really did. And one of my close friends, I'm proud to say a close friend, is former Governor Charlie Baker. And Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito always had the wonderful saying of, if you find something that's working, keep doing it. There's no need to upset the apple cart and change something just to change it. The best practices is a wonderful model to utilize, whether it's Massachusetts, anywhere on the East Coast, or anywhere in the country. But one of the things I did want to say too is just looking at the two industry leaders of FanDuel and DraftKings, if you take them and you take all the other operators, they were committed to actually having an industry that was fair to everyone. And they were a part of all the conversations that we had. And it wasn't to try to get a leg up. It was to just try to make it fair and equitable. And so I really appreciated that. And Matt, to the original point, I believe, of the question that you proposed earlier, some of the things we might be looking at next year, I think in Massachusetts, one of the things would be to bring in collegiate gaming to allow for Massachusetts-based teams. I'm not going to sit here and say that there's a lot of action, in my humble opinion, guessing wise, on Boston College. It was great that we kind of left it that you could bet on the Alabamas and the Georgias if we're looking at football. But looking potentially at what's to come. When we had Jerry York, a longtime BC hockey coach, come and testify with us, I kind of said to him, listen, coach, what we're trying to do is take the industry out of the shadows and regulate it, right? Put safeguards in place for the consumer, but also for the student athlete. And unfortunately, BC previously hasn't had the best of track records. They're much better now. But at this point, it's like, all right, if you're going to, and we're just going to use, we'll use FanDuel in this example because Corey would definitely catch this right away. But if I'm going to the local bookie and I'm betting $1,000 every week on, let's say, BC football or BC basketball, they'll take the action. If I all of a sudden go to the bookie and bet 10 grand one week, they might take the action. They might look away, but that would be it. If we're on FanDuel and they create a profile, AI generated to a certain extent, obviously they see my track record and kind of some of my habits, and I'm betting that same amount, which I would not do. I don't have the wherewithal to do that. You don't get into politics to get rich, at least if you're doing it the right way. But I'll tell you this much, if I'm doing 1,000 a week and then all of a sudden I go 10,000, I would have to think that white flags would go up instantaneously. And you would know exactly industry wide that there might be irregularities that we have to look at, whether it's just on my side and, you look at people like GameSense in Massachusetts for safe gaming, or you start looking at, what might be out there that could potentially be nefarious. So, I think regulating the industry, bringing it out of the shadows, and in Massachusetts, looking at the potential of the legalized form of gaming for collegiate sports within Mass, if they're not in a tournament, say, of 4 or more teams, shout out to the Beanpot. But if there's anything else, that might be one of the things that gets proposed as well.
And let me stick with you for a second here because I, kind of finished the thread of potential legislative changes going forward. I think, most who are looking at this industry would probably agree that I think your regulator, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, they've really been one of the more proactive regulators we've seen in terms of some issues they've taken a bolder stance on. I think data privacy regulations being one of the biggest and most notable. We've seen it recently with some of the discussion they've had about limiting players, which is an issue that I don't think a lot of regulators have really looked into, at least at a public level. How does that impact the way the legislature thinks about potential legislative changes when you have a regulator that is, I would say, more proactive than maybe some others are?
Yeah, we're very lucky. I mean, the interim chair, Jordan Maynard, is someone that I consider a friend. Brad Hill on the commission, also someone I consider a friend. But they're people that you trust, that you can have a conversation with, that if you instill a couple of different things and regs that they have to put in and implement, that they're going to do it effectively. They're going to do it pragmatically. They're going to do it with taking kind of the industry into account, but also the gamer side of it into account and the user side. And so having kind of that back and forth, and there were a couple of things that we actually had to tidy up in the supplemental budget to kind of close out the year that we did past sports wagering, but they were more just tying up loose ends. They weren't anything to change kind of the regulatory structure, but kind of moving a couple of different things around. But having that conversation, saying, hey, listen, I believe I understand your intent in the law, but is this actually what you guys meant? And us saying, yes, it's exactly what we meant, or hey, no, we were actually hoping that it would be like this, and them taking that feedback is invaluable when it comes to safe gaming for all of our constituents.
I want to touch, and this is going to throw something out to everybody here because we've touched on it a couple of times and we've mentioned it a couple of times, sort of, the role of AI and the role of tech in this industry and how it shapes regulation legislation going forward. So I guess I'll throw this out to the whole panel of sort of what technological advances do you see playing a critical role in shaping that policy? We saw, yesterday's panel for the summit was about AI and how it can be used to enhance responsible gaming measures. I guess I'll start with you, Director Rebuck. How do you see, you've mentioned this earlier, how do you see tech dictating the evolution of policy?
Well, again, the entrepreneurs out there in this world, they're incredible and so talented with the tools they bring to you. It just knocks you out trying to understand how it could be deployed into the oversight and regulation of this industry. But I'll give you an example. You hear out about the United Kingdom, and you see a little bit of chatter on this from others, is that there should be affordability checks on everybody who's going to open an account and tracking their not only their investment, their play, but also their standing as it goes with whether or not they continue to have affordability to gamble into what's great. And the products I've seen out there that have been brought to our attention are unbelievably strong in providing the industry with a seamless but individualized and personalized way to monitor the person who signs up for an account online. As you know, we know there's no privacy on your online account. We know so much about you. We probably know more than your spouse knows about you or your children. But to use that tool in a way to look at people individually, as opposed to throwing out these broad-based standards saying, well, you can only make a deposit 5 times in 30 days, or, you know, you can only gamble Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and if you gamble on any other day, you have to stop. You know, they're just not supported by any evidence-based research. And then there was a article came out today, which I'm sure everybody was reading, is that maybe some of the regulations when it comes to advertising are way out of line with what evidence-based research says, or maybe we need better evidence-based research to be completed to understand what the true impact is with regards to that topic. And so I would say the same thing here, that never underestimate evidence-based research, academic research, that they can be utilized by everybody to have a baseline to understand what the real challenges are and how to address them in the future. And so again, that costs money, that costs time. But when you look at this industry, the online gaming industry, and some of the groups they formed, whether it be Roga or Rogo, you know, they put money into research. And I compliment them for that, because they understand. And in New Jersey, as you know, they pay for all the research. Our licensees pay for all the research we do through Rutgers University. Okay, they pay for it all. And they're going to make a decision to pay for it for their trade associations. Okay. And so my point to you, Matt, is in that area, yeah, we need more better research, more effective research, more academic research, supportable and challengeable by and publicized, so that people can weigh in and say the research is strong or there's some weaknesses in this research. I'm all for that. It's got to be transparent.
I come to you the same question, you know, where do you see the tech dictating the evolution of policy?
Yeah, so I think what Director Rebuck said was correct with respect to there are great opportunities in the use of that technology for responsible gaming purposes. I think for a bunch of different reasons, right? There's a lot of data involved, and if you are able to look at the data the right way, you can identify the appropriate factors that increase the risk that a certain individual is experiencing, or maybe is going to experience gambling harm, and how do we intervene before they actually get there is really our goal. And I think by using technology, one, you can look at more factors so that you can have a better idea of what are the things that we really need to focus on and what is the risk of this specific individual. And you can also intervene more timely. So, you know, at the point at which they're depositing way more than they should be depositing, you can intervene right then. And I think that's simply not possible if you're not using some sort of, you know, automated approach. I'd also say too, just, you know, there's a lot that can be done to make the consumer experience better. And I think that's appropriate. So, you know, we talk about, you know, making sure that the right wager is appropriate to the right customer at the right time. And I think there's some more personalization you can do with that. So that if you're, you know, a fan of a certain team or you want to see a certain thing, you can have that on your experience on a sports wagering app. That, you know, when I look at all the sports wagering apps, I think they're all still too complicated. And there's a lot of progress that can be made in making them simpler for average customers.
And Representative Meridian, coming to you next on this sort of same thing. How do you think of it from a lawmaker's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously see through, you know, the AI sophisticated analysis techniques, you get like the predictive modeling, right? Which helps out kind of the operator and things like that. You see the trend analysis. things that, like I mentioned earlier, I gave you the tongue-in-cheek example, but the fact remains that, you know, the trend analysis, understanding what the individual and user is going to do, means that AI plays a crucial role in risk management. But Corey had mentioned, you know, kind of the suggestive side of it. Listen, if I'm sitting here for more than a day or two, I think my phone's going to go off and let me know that I need milk in the fridge. You know, I mean, you get everything is such instantaneous in nature right now that, you know, you can get food delivered in an hour, your whole shopping list from Walmart or Amazon or wherever you want. And so having the capability of the user, the sports bettor, to have a interface system that's working for them, while also understanding that, you know, it is going to play the risk management, the safeguard, keep their best interests in mind. You know, I think those are all things that we need to continue to learn more about, because while the iPhone was out in 07, we're still learning things that we can do with it now. And so, you know, to understand the industry is going to take time. To understand technology and the ever-evolving nature of it takes time. But it's something that I think myself and all of my colleagues would certainly be open to. So if the industry comes to us, or if the regulatory body comes to us and says, hey, we're seeing something that is either very beneficial in Massachusetts, or, hey, we're seeing something that really could be a potential hazard in the horizon, then we have to take action on that. And more often than not, but, you know, language and bills tend to get passed reactively, where sometimes we need to be a little bit more proactive in making sure that it's a product that's good for everyone.
I just want to get one more reminder to everybody to send in a couple questions. We're coming down towards the end here, and I just want to make sure everybody gets heard. And there's one thing I wanted to bring up, because I don't think it's you can really talk about the next wave of sports betting regulation and legislation without talking about some of the different verticals we've seen that are offering comparable products to sports betting operators. I think last year we really saw the rise of the daily fantasy pick'em style games and some of the backlash we saw against that. And more recently, I think we've really seen an increase in sweepstakes social gaming operations, with some operators are even leaving the regulated space in favor of a sweepstakes operation. So I guess, you know, how do you expect, I guess, those in your respective fields to sort of react to these operations? Dr. Reebok, I want to start with you, coming from the regulator side, because we've seen some regulators have already taken some action against sweepstakes operators. Where do you think the future lies with that?
Yeah, I would say this, that from a state-by-state perspective, most of our anti-gambling laws, criminal laws, were drafted a long time ago, probably in the 50s and maybe as late as the 60s, and were geared to stopping organized crime from engaging in gambling activities as a tool to engage in criminal activity. Fast forward to where we are today. Another example of the power of the internet and the entrepreneurs who are out there looking to use the internet to their advantage to essentially gain financial profits. And what better way to do that than to look at current laws and try to find loopholes that allow them to essentially have an unregulated marketplace that generates substantial gain to them without any oversight from the government. And so the legislatures need to do something. And I would think that the first thing they need to do is take a real deep dive look at what the existing criminal laws are that authorize gambling in their state. And then, if needed, modify those laws to address how they want gambling to be in their state. Gambling in most states is going to continue to increase. There's going to be, you know, it has. I mean, you look at every state, man, where they are today, and many of the features they offer today through the internet, or even like sports wagering, just didn't exist. And I'm not saying these forms of quasi-gambling today, or what I think is gambling, should be banned. I'm just saying there's a mechanism to do it, and they should be regulated. And the best way to do that is in our state, the state of New Jersey, is get your law right, your criminal law right. And from there, people want to have this as a game that they play as a gambling game, put it up to the people to vote on as a referendum. Okay. And if the people want it, then it will be legalized, regulated, and overseen. But it's a really, at this point in time, it's damaging to the regulated, legalized industry because it's unregulated. And I'm not saying it's criminal, but it's clearly unregulated. And some of the weaknesses are going to be more and more transparent with regards to RG, consumer protections, and essentially taxation. It's not taxed. So I think that'll get some attention from legislators, certainly in our state, as they look to the future and how to gain a better understanding of the use of the internet, because these games only exist on the internet, to essentially profit from the citizens that are engaged in those functions in the state of New Jersey.
Representative Brady, I'm going to come to you next on this. Is this something from a lawmaker perspective? Is there awareness about this? Is there concern about this? Where do you land on this?
So I think it's educating ourselves. To the director's point, it's trying to understand what the next wave is going to be. I mean, I guess even in this conversation, my mind wanders to like when I would sit there on, let's say Candy Crush, and you have the opportunity to buy more whatever coins or whatever it is, packages to help you out. Well, how different is that? But now we're talking sports wagering and things of that nature, and daily fantasy and things like that. And so there has to be something in place. And I can see right now the pushback is going to be exactly what I said. Hey, listen, you can already do it here. Why can't we just do it here? But it's kind of circumventing the rules that are in place. And I do give the entrepreneurs a ton of kudos for trying to make sure that they get, their take as well. And certainly we don't want to discourage people from thinking outside the box, but we want to do it in a legal way. And so putting the safeguards in place, like I mentioned earlier, taking industries out of the shadows, regulate them, make them a safe environment for all. Needs to be something that we look towards in the future, but educating ourselves. When I talk to different lobbyists, I say the best thing you can do is tell us why you need something, but why there would be opposition to it as well. Because in the elected world, I'd like to think that we need to know a little bit about a lot. And so it allows you to have conversations, but when you do a deep dive, say like being a member of the conference committee for sports wagering, it allows you to really get into the nuts and bolts and see what works and see what doesn't. So making sure that we educate ourselves is probably the number one thing. And having trustworthy individuals that you can rely on will give you a fair shake is certainly something that benefits everyone.
And Corey, sort of the same question coming to you from an operator's perspective on this.
Well, I've got 3 minutes and I could spend 3 hours, but just quickly, I'll say, building on what Director Rebuck said, it is absolutely critical that states establish a level playing field. And whether that's the legislature or attorneys general, investigate your own laws, investigate what these guys are doing, and determine whether it's legal or not in your state so that we can compete on a level playing field. And I would just say, if you're not familiar with the sweeps gaming sites, they are very, very large and growing, as well as some of the parlay pick sites. And so if they're legal, then great, we can address it that way. But if they're not, then they should be enforced against.
I'm going to try and sneak one more question in here from before we finish up here from the Q&A. We talked a little bit about collegiate betting earlier. One of the questions is, we know the NCAA has advocated to remove collegiate prop betting in states with some success. Do you think at some point they would seek a blanket prohibition on all collegiate betting? How would you view this position? I guess I'll turn to Director Rebuck on this. I know this obviously Jersey has had some issues in terms of trying to legalize in-state betting. What do you suspect this is the ultimate goal, and what effect do you think sort of a blanket prohibition on collegiate betting would have?
Well, the lobbyists clearly have gotten to the Safer Act people, because there's a provision in there already that mirrors what they're trying to do on a state-by-state basis right now. Our experience in New Jersey is different than other states, and we're a little different, and we do not authorize wagering in the state of New Jersey on New Jersey colleges or collegiate events that are in New Jersey. Whether the college comes to play in New Jersey or whether the school is located in New Jersey, like Rutgers or Princeton or Seton Hall, for example. So the parlay wagering that occurs primarily on collegiate sports right now in our state is based on the parlay wagering on out-of-state college athletes and out-of-state college teams. And we were very concerned that students might be harassed, right? Because maybe somebody in Pennsylvania is betting on the Rutgers game and the Rutgers kicker misses a field goal and they come after him. So the Attorney General authorized us as attorneys to communicate to the conferences and the leagues in New Jersey and just say, you have a fiduciary duty here. If any of your students or members of your community are threatened with harm or bribed or blackmailed or harassed, you need to investigate it criminally. And when you do that, oh, by the way, we have assets here in our Division of State Police is standing by that will assist you after your investigation is done to understand what we're going to do next when you find out if it's real or not. And you should notify us when that occurs. When I was director, I never had any notices for any college or university in the state of New Jersey that they had a problem. That's not to say the problem doesn't exist in other states, and I understand that, but I believe that probably because of what was put into place by our constitutional amendment and the people not wanting this to occur on the colleges in our state has reduced the risk of threats to those students who are playing or the participants in the leagues. Not to say they're not going to be harassed, believe me. And that has happened before sports wagering was legalized. But the expansion of it because of sports wagering, we're not seeing in our state. Not to say we won't deal with it if it occurs, because we will treat it as a criminal action and it should be investigated such to protect your members of your community. And everybody knows that. So even the leagues know. So we stand ready to go after the person who wants to make threats to somebody. So we're a little different than other states, but I do believe that that one factor has made a significant difference in the volume of harassment that occurs in state.
All right, and with that, I'll wrap things up because I see the blinking light that says we are out of time. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists, and on behalf of the panel, thank you to everyone with IDEA and GeoComply who have put this together, and everybody behind the scenes. We have one more webinar in the Power Lunch Summit series. Join tomorrow. In tomorrow's session, CEOs representing various key interests in U.S. iGaming will have a debate around core issues surrounding continued progress, success, and sustainability of the iGaming industry in the U.S. I know I'll be checking it out, so I hope you will too. Again, thank you to everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. It's been enjoyable. Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.